everyone. I'm Nora Katz, host and producer of the ISJL Virtual Vacation. Our upcoming episode, premiering at 11 a.m. Central Time on Tuesday, May 25th, is all about Southern Jewish film festivals. That's right, the Virtual Vacation is going to the movies. This episode is the brainchild of Elias Levy Swain, a senior at my alma mater, Carleton College. Elias worked as a history and heritage extern at the ISJL this winter alongside Clara Posner, who co-produced our episodes about country and bluegrass. I want you to hear from Elias about why Jewish film festivals interest him and why this episode should be the next thing on your queue.
It was kind of grounded in just kind of my own personal interests. I grew up Jewish. I grew up obsessed with film. And I kind of had some vague sense that those things went together in some way. And I think that a lot of that is kind of grounded in very toxic stereotypes, but is also grounded in some truth, which I kind of found out while doing this project, which was really interesting. I haven't had the opportunity to go to a Jewish film festival before, and it's not something that I really understood existed on the scale that it does. And so, yeah, it was kind of just like Judaism, film, that was an open question of like how they fit together. And yeah, I think that's kind of how I started looking into that. I mean, just like kind of the crux of the issue, which I think came from several like really engaging scholarly sources that we incorporated into the research for the episode, was just kind of like this idea of Jews being very, very heavily involved in something, but at the same time, very often like culturally or in other ways like disadvantaged or disempowered within that kind of industry. And so the idea of like Jews being involved in film and Jews like dominating the film industry are very different things. And I think that that's something that, it was kind of a suspicion I always had, because, like growing up Jewish, that Jews are not actually in charge of the media. But you hear that a lot. And so it was kind of a weird question of, all right, well, like, how do we reconcile those things? This kind of like this historically very evident, I would say like overrepresentation in this industry with the fact that like we're certainly not in charge of it. So like how has that worked through history, and like how has anti-Semitism been baked into Jewish involvement in this industry? And I think that like reading about the history a bit and learning about like specific players who maybe seemed to hold power but actually didn't, that was really interesting for me and engaging. I think like pretty surprising in some instances, realizing that like, hey, well, this person held this position, he was Jewish, but at the same time, he reported to this person who was a renowned anti-Semite, and who was kind of like going after every idea that this person had, that he could, basically just because this person was Jewish, And so I think that was, I don't know, it was a very frustrating thing to read about, but it was also, I think, pretty fascinating. And I think that you see a lot of the lived effects of that kind of like inclusion and exclusion, or inclusion and erasure, today, which is really interesting. Part of the research, I think, led me to conclude to some extent the Jewish Film Festival. I mean, each one kind of stands in, I think, differently, in its own context, but the Jewish Film Festival, I think, illuminates how film itself is like a site of like expression, but also one of contestation and assimilation and tension between those two things, and tension between, asserting one's voice and trying to mimic the voice of someone else, or a dominant culture. And I think that, yeah, I mean, like I go to my local film festivals back home. They're held in places where there are Jewish congregations, and there are a lot of Jews who are involved in them. I'm from New York. But at the same time, there's no explicit tie to kind of like Jewish cultural or religious identity in those festivals. Maybe it's something that is there, but it's not really talked about. And I think that like going to a space where that you're engaging with film in a Jewish way, I remember, I think it's the Atlantic Jewish Film Festival, where they talk about like the film festival is truly tikkun olam, like healing the world through film. And I think like drawing very explicit connections between like what film can do in the world and what Judaism can do in the world, it kind of leads us to answer, or to like raise and then potentially answer questions about like what can Jewish film do in the world, and like what is particular about Jewish film, when ownership is really given to like the Jewish individuals who have contributed to the making of those films. I mean, it's funny, even as like a Jewish person, even as someone who's always been interested in film and like I think knows quite a bit about the American film industry, like it was still kind of surprising to me the extent to which these Jewish film festivals like act to give ownership and empowerment to like Jewish artists who are not getting represented elsewhere. Because it is like, I think that's a very dominant assumption that Jews are very heavily involved and often heavily empowered in the film industry. And like to take note of the kind of like the breadth of Jewish film festivals that do exist, I think is evidence of the fact that there is like a need for ethnically specific like artistic celebrations. And I think that that points to the fact that in many cases Jews are not as empowered as we kind of suspect they are in this industry that they have become like culturally associated with in often a pretty toxic way. And so I hope that that's just kind of like a question that people engage with through the episode. And then also like hopefully they go to Jewish film festivals. Like I really want to now. I'm excited for the pandemic to be over.
In a moment when we can't go to the movies together, it's easy to start reminiscing about seeing films on the big screen. One of our interviewees for this episode is Brad Pilcher, the Associate Director of the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival, which is one of the largest Jewish film festivals in the world. Brad shares my nostalgia for sitting in a dark movie theater waiting for the show to begin.
I've been vaccinated now for about 3 weeks. So I'm fully vaccinated, and I'm still going through the sort of reintegration, trying to get myself comfortable with going outside and going to places and wearing masks and not wearing masks. And I'm trying to sort of acclimate myself back to the normal of what I used to be. And the one thing that I haven't done yet, because I'm kind of waiting for the right film and we have a 2-year-old, so trying to find the time as well, is to go back to a movie theater. I cannot wait because you miss it so much, and you don't think about it until it's taken away. But you're like, wow, like I've watched a lot of movies this year, all at home. None of them have landed. Very few of them have landed anywhere near the way that they land when I've been able to watch them in theaters. So yeah, the nostalgia is very high, very, very high for me.
I'm really excited about this episode. It takes us across the South and across the country, from relatively small Jewish film festivals to enormous ones. Pop your popcorn and join us on Facebook and YouTube at 11 a.m. Central on Tuesday, May 25th. We'll see you there.